good to start? Okay, all right. So appreciate everybody coming out. I know there's a lot of great content going on, or at least some content according to this guy right here, but there's much better topics out there than this one, so I appreciate you taking the time to come check this out. So executing remote commands and getting output using WMI, all right? We've got about 72 slides to go through, so I want you guys to bear with me, and they'll be really quick. So first of all, thanks to all the sponsors for sponsoring the event. You know, all these awesome venues wouldn't be possible without them. Really appreciate all the support. Quick about me, I've been in IT for a long time, done automation security back in the batch file VB script days, and now with PowerShell, C#, and started the company, created a product. You can check it out at the booth tomorrow if you get a chance. All right, so the original problem I had, and this is more of a novel approach to getting output from remote commands that was really a big issue years ago. That's not so much now with WinRM and other, SSH and other things. But it's something that I put out there in my first open source project, super small, nothing major at all. But I thought it was pretty cool and kind of like to share it with you all. So the original problem was being able to run scripts remotely, whether it be scripts or command line tools, and then getting the remote output from it, so the shell output. So not just the exit code, but the actual output from it. And doing that with WMI seemed completely impossible, at least to me years ago. All right, straight to the demo. All right, so I've got a couple of VMs set up here, and we're going to run some commands just to show that we can't get the normal, execute stuff normally and get the output remotely. So this box I got is SF1, it's online. And let's just see if we can create a directory remotely and get that. Let's try PSEexec. And I'm just going to run the hostname command just so we can see if we can execute that remotely and get the remote hostname off of it. PSEexec is a great way to get stuff remotely, but there may be some scenarios, and there were back when this problem hit me years ago, where we couldn't use PSEexec. That's going to take a second to come back, but it will fail. Or it will succeed. Oh, so that one actually ran. So I did not shut down, I think the admin $ is what PSEexec needs to run remotely. So if that was off or disabled, we wouldn't be able to use PSEexec. So let's try WinRM. Now, while I'm waiting on that, how many of you are using WinRM today? All right. How many are using SSH? Are you using that just Windows environment, Linux, both? Both? Okay, cool. So we can see here WinRM isn't working. I don't have SSH set up. That would be another way to do it as well. And so now let's see if WMI is working and also look at the WinRM service at the same time. Can everybody read the shell okay? All right, cool. So I should have asked that up front. All right, so WMI is working. We can see that the WinRM service is stopped, hence the reason our WinRM command didn't work. Now, what I've run into in a lot of situations, especially previous employees and also current customers, is a reluctance from the security team to enable WinRM. That's one reason why a solution like this is kind of relevant today, although the caveat is I wouldn't say, hey, use this script as, or this technique and script as like your go-to production way to execute remote commands. We do have customers that use it. It works fine, works great. But definitely, WinRM, and I think Microsoft's go-to or go-forward strategy is going to be SSH now. But using something like that is definitely the more long-term solution. So let's try to use the Wmi Exec Script. And we're going to just run that same hostname command. Or actually, we're going to do a dir and then hostname. So if this works, what you're going to see is it's going to execute the command remotely. It's going to then wait on that process to come back. And now we've got the results. So you can see we've got the dir command that was run, and then at the very end there, we can see the hostname SF1. And if we look at the syntax, it's pretty straightforward. We just pass in a computer name and a command, and that can be just, putting those together with semicolon, so multiple commands. Let's see. And then, so like what would be some other use cases? So that's a super simple use case, right? There's a lot of commands that also support remoting that don't use WMI, that might use service controller or remote registry, some other methods. Maybe something like powerconfig. That's something that doesn't support running it remotely. So let's run that command. So here you see we can run the powerconfig command line tool, and we can see the different power profiles, and then the asterisk shows which one is the active one. So little things like that you could do, again, if you've got access to PSEexec, or if you've got access to WinRM or SSH, you can do those. But if for some reason your environment, or maybe a client or customer that you're working with's environment has those locked down, you couldn't, this would be one way to do that. So now let's actually go look at the code and see how this actually works on the back end. Is that still readable? Everybody good? Okay, all right. So we're going to start off with the main function here. Me talking through source code is like watching paint dry, so please interrupt me with questions or, hey, that looks horrible, or why did you do that, or whatever, so we can get through this real quick. Starting with the main function here, we've got to set up this couple of variables with command string, command ID, and we call this function called create script instance. So let's go find that. All right, so here's the create script instance function, and it's going to take a computer name. So here, line 41, where it says class check, what we're doing is looking for this custom class called Noxygen_Wmi Exec. That could be whatever you want it to be. That's just the name I chose. And this is really the meat and potatoes, if you will, or the schnitzel and potatoes, since we're in Vienna, of how this works. And it was really, once I came across this, and like I said, I struggled with this for several years in previous environments, but once I finally figured out what I could do, I knew this was possible, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. But once I did, it's extremely easy, and that's why this talk is very simplistic, and there's not a whole lot to it, honestly, because once you figure out how it works, it's just super simple. And so basically, we check for this custom WMI class to see if it's there. If it's not there, then we're going to create it. So we skip down to line 47 here. We're going to create a new management class. So this is a new WMI class, and we're going to create it on the remote computer that we're targeting in the root SIMv2. And here we're calling it Noxygen_Wmi Exec. And we're going to create some properties on it, one called command ID, and that's going to hold a GUID, which is what we're going to use to track what we're doing on the remote box, this particular instance. And we set that, you can see line 51 here, we set that to a key, so that's like basically like a primary key, because WMI is just basically a database. So we're setting it as a primary key on there. And then the command output properties at line 52, this is where we're going to store the actual output from that remote command so we can then retrieve it and view it locally. So we do all that. The .put method creates that class remotely. If we skip down to 57 here, you see we're creating a new instance of that class. So we do set Wmi instance for that custom class we created remotely. And then here in the command ID, we're going to populate that by passing that Wmi instance that we created, and then we're going to select the command ID property out of it. And so that's going to give us, once that new instance is created, we're going to get the GUID back from it and then use that later. So then we return that command ID. So I'm going to go back to where we were in main. So here we're on 115. So, if we got a valid, and there's a lot more error checking and things in here that should be done. This is very terse and not a lot of error checking in it. So just checking to see if that's null. We really should be checking to see if it's, a valid GUID. If it's not, we exit out. All right, so you can see here in the notes, it says, meanwhile, on the remote machine, we're going to execute that command, store the output as a string, and then we're going to get a reference to the current Wmi class using that command ID where the output should be. And so here we've got this encoded command variable. And so in here we're creating a result variable, and we're calling invoke command. And then we're going to pass this command string as for the script block. We're going to pipe that to out string. And then we're going to run another command to do get Wmi object for our custom Wmi class, and we're going to filter it based off of that command ID. So the thought being here that, maybe you're running multiple commands, maybe other people are running commands using this Wmi Exec. You want to make sure you're only getting the output back of what you created. Now, if you take this further, that's obviously a security risk in production because anybody can get to that class. So if you're storing anything sensitive in there, that's it's not going to be a good idea. And we'll talk about it at the end. But again, this is open source, so you go and extend it. And there's a lot of things you could do with this base concept here to make it more secure and do a lot more things with it. So we filter that by the command ID. And sorry. Back to where we were. Man, I'm having an awesome time with the mouse today. Sorry about that. All right, so after we filter that by the command ID, we're going to set the Wmi instance, set arguments on it for the command output, and we're going to populate that command output argument with the result from the command. Now, all of this, everything on line 125, all those commands that we kind of chain together there, we're basically going to take that and then convert it to base 64 encoded string. So we kind of package it up nice and neat. We don't have to worry about, special characters in the command line or anything like that. And then we put that back in the encoded command string. So then we, do some output to the user so they know what's going on, and then we run the exec command function, pass in the computer name, and then that encoded command string that we just created. So let's go back up and look at exec command. So here, line 76, what I just said, passing the entire command is base 64. We call PowerShell, and again, this is because we're doing WMI. The default example I've got here is using PowerShell.exe. Honestly, I haven't even tried this with PWSH with WMI enabled. It should work the same or similar. That's kind of on my to-do list. We do a couple switches, do execution policy unrestricted because that's always awesome, and then we basically pass in that, using the encoded command switch, we pass in that base 64 encoded command with everything in it. And then line 78, once we've, we basically invoke WMI, the Win32 process. Now this is kind of funny because one of the things I struggled with back in the day was, Win32 process create, you can create remote processes, but you only get the exit code. And so, but I'm actually using it here within this method to actually execute this remote command. So still kind of using it to some degree. So we do the create method on it, passing that command. And then if we get a 0 back for the return value, we know the command executed remotely. And then we basically kind of poll that box to get the output back. So we'll be checking the process, filtering the process on that remote process ID. And then once it's done, we're going to call another method to then parse the output and bring it back. So get script output. All right. So here on line 68, create another instance of that custom class. And then we do the filter again on the command ID. And then we populate this result variable with the command output property of that remote WMI instance. Excuse me. And then we return that output. So if we go back to main, then basically, once we've got that result, we write it out to the user, and that's all there is to it. Now, any questions on the actual code? Like I said, this is out on GitHub, but does all of that kind of make sense? Like I said, I know me walking through it is probably like the most boring thing in the world, but yeah.
So to sum things up, you're basically creating a WMI class, executing the command in that instance, and then in order to retrieve the output, you just populate the command output field of that instance, right?
Right, yeah. Create the custom WMI class, execute the command, and then take the results, pipe it into put it into the property of that custom instance, and then retrieve it. Yeah. That's really, and it was just the light bulb okay, WMI is a SQL database, so I should be able to create a table, create some columns in the table, store data in it. Probably the funniest part of this was when I finally put all this together, tested it, validated it worked, put it out on Twitter, created GitHub repo. Literally the same day as I was putting it out there, my searches came back with other projects that had been out probably a year or two before mine. They were like way more in depth and doing the same technique. And those were like more like command and control, like hacker type projects or whatever. But it was funny that none of my searches ever before that had ever, come up with those results. If they had, I would probably never even gone down this route. Yeah, well, I mean, and I fancy myself a decent Google searcher, and and I still never came across anything. So maybe it was just my blind, me being blind or whatever. But I'll say the difference with this solution and other ones that I've seen out there that are more advanced is this is like very super simple, easy to use. Like I said, it's only 138 lines of code. Versus the others are like more of like larger frameworks that kind of use this as a basis but do way more. Any other questions about the source code? All right. Let's see. So, why even bother, right? So, like I said, there's better solutions out there as far as using, WinRM, SSH, PSEexec if you got it. All those work great. There may be scenarios in your environment where you can't use some or any of them. Because this doesn't have any dependencies and only uses WMI on Windows, it's an easy way to kind of bootstrap and get something going like early stages, depending on what the situation or scenario you have is. And it's a single script, single PS1 file, so there's not a lot you have to do to get it up and running. You can literally drop the file in a box and use it out of the gate without any configuration. It's open source. I have a link to the GitHub repo out there. feel free to go out there and check it out, download it, fork it, do something even better with it. I keep saying I'm going to go in and add more stuff like file uploads, downloads, different things like that, because there's a ton of things you can do with it because it's such a basic fundamental concept. Just having the time to actually do it. And also as far as the sponsors, I'm with System Frontier. We're one of the sponsors, so hopefully you'll check out systemfrontier.com/PowerShell. There's tons more stuff you can do as far as executing commands remotely, creating web GUIs, things like that. I'll actually be doing a talk on that Thursday, I think. Like I said, this session is super short, so if you have any more questions, I'd love to answer them. I apologize for not having a 45 minutes worth of content for you, but so.
Yes, there's work on constrained language on the receiving end.
Did you say constrained language?
PowerShell is constrained to
I would. You're going to have administrator rights to be able to create the custom WMI class, and so I don't know that it would work with constrained language unless, depending on what commandlets are available to you. But creating the WMI class creating the WMI class isn't using the commandlet, using the .NET method to create the WMI class. So I would kind of think you would actually kind of bypass that maybe. That's a good question. I don't have a solid answer to that. It's something I need to test out.
creating the WMI class during remotely, basically.
Well, yeah.
Then you're piping in like a start PowerShell process, and I think that might not work.
Yeah. So you're using the only part where you're actually executing remotely, as far as PowerShell concerned, would be the Win32 process create. So I think that would probably be the one part that might get you.
Yeah, I think line 77 might not.
So do you think, so you would be invoking the Win32 process, the create method, so you'd have to have permissions to execute the create method. But then once you do that, I don't know where the constrained language would get down to the level of the actual command that you're in, because that's just going to be like a straight exe command. So you're actually, if you can execute a remote process, you should be able to execute any process as long as you have permissions from the account that you're running as. So firing off the PowerShell.exe, I don't think would trigger that unless there was some other thing that captured it.
Just a comment to that. You could rewrite the Wmi method, since with the two processes Wmi. You can use Wmi to create the process instead of PowerShell. If the only thing was to evade using PowerShell there.
But by which method?
With the two process Wmi has a create method, I believe.
Are you saying the WMI Win32 process?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's what we're doing here in line 78.
Instead of using PowerShell, you can use the Wmi methods directly, probably. I haven't tested it, just if the thing here was to avoid using invoke Wmi method,
Yeah.
you should probably avoid using it.
Well, I think I know where you're going with that, but in this instance, you're actually invoking the WMI method locally. So you're not actually doing it remotely. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? All right. Cool. Well, I appreciate your time. You have a much extended coffee break. If anybody has any extra questions after we shut it down, feel free to stop me. Love to hear your feedback or comments. Appreciate everybody's time.